Hello, everybody, and welcome to Sake Revolution. This is America's first sake podcast. That's right, you did tune into the right podcast. I am your host, John Puma from the Sake Notes, also administrator over at the Internet Sake Discord and the corresponding r/sake subreddit over with your friends at Reddit.
And I am your host, Timothy Sullivan. I'm a sake samurai, a sake educator, as well as the founder of the Urban Sake website. And every week, John and I will be here tasting and chatting about all things sake and doing our best to make it fun and easy to understand.
Wonderful, wonderful, Tim. You know what I think we haven't done in a bit? I get a little antsy when we don't do this for a little while.
I feel like you've got me in a corner, John.
Ha! Very, very good. Yes, perhaps a sake education corner.
How about that? Well, I think it's very pressing that we get to this important topic. Insert groan here.
Yeah, pressing.
Pressing.
So we want to get into every nook and cranny about sake education at some point or another on the show.
Yes.
And so, yeah, it is time to get into the three pressing methods.
Yes, and this combines two of my favorite things, Sake Education Corner and a mini-series.
Oh, yeah, because we get to do three of these.
Yes, this is going to be
fantastic.
A mini-series about how sake is pressed. Yes.
All right. Now, real quick, so what's that going to do? What's that going to bring to the table, the different pressing methods?
Yeah, well, if you can envision the sake mash, the fermentation mash bubbling away.
All right.
I'm
envisioning.
The color is like melted French vanilla ice cream, like a little bit off-white, and it's got chunks of rice in there, and the aroma is just wafting this beautiful sake fruity aroma. And in order to get the alcohol out of there, we need to separate the unfermented rice chunks that are left over from the beautiful freshly born sake. So in order to separate the alcohol from the leftover rice that didn't break down, we need to do a step that we call pressing. And there's two words that they use to describe this in Japanese. One is joso, and the other one is shibori. And shibori means squeezing. So that's like the literal translation is squeezing. So we're gonna.
So I can't just pour what is in the tank into my glass and start drinking and say this is sake.
Well, if you did, then you would have doburoku. So that's completely unfiltered, unpressed sake, and that's actually not legal usually in Japan. So you have to do some type of pressing or squeezing or filtration in this step in order to separate the alcohol from the unfermented rice. And, you know, people often ask about cloudy sake at this juncture. What's cloudy sake then? Well, cloudy sake or nigori is coarsely filtered sake, and the clear stuff is like a finely filtered sake. So just know it's called shibori or squeezing, and it's separating the alcohol from the unfermented rice. And there's three primary ways that we do this. And today we're going to talk about probably what I would consider to be the most traditional method. So we're going to start with that.
All right. So we're getting the big boy out of the way.
Yes. It's not the most common method nowadays, but it's what I would consider to be the most traditional method. That's what we're going to talk about.
All right. And what do we call this most traditional method?
Well, it's called pressing by Fune. Fune, F-U-N-E, Fune. We're going to put the fun in Fune today. Well, at least I'm making myself laugh.
Two guys without kids. We get a lot of dad jokes on the show.
Yes, so Fune. It's also called sakabune. So sometimes F's change to B in Japanese. So sakabune or simply Fune. Now, if you write this kanji character out, it's the kanji character for vat or tub. But it's pronounced differently in the context of sake. Fune actually means boat.
Boat?
Boat. So if it's
like literal boat?
like ahoy, matey, boat.
Okay. All right. So they call the all right. Why they call it a boat? I'm gonna bite, Tim. Why do they call it a boat?
Well, the way the Fune press works, I want you to imagine a deep, long rectangular box. So you've got two short ends and you have two long ends, and let's say it's about 4 or 5 feet deep. And this rectangular box very roughly looks like a boat.
This seems like a stretch.
A bit of a stretch. But the way that the Fune works is that they have this long rectangular box, and originally they were made of wood, and modern ones are made of stainless steel. And they take these bags called Fukuro, bags or sacks, and they look like pillowcases, all right? So they're narrow and kind of long, and they have one end open. They fill the pillowcases or the Fukuro with the mash. So it's the rice and the sake, everything mixed together. And they lay them down side by side in this rectangular box called the Fune. And then they start stacking them one on top of the other. So these sacks or bags start to pile up inside this narrow rectangular box. And they stack them all up one on top of the other.
Okay.
And if you need a visual of this, just check out our show notes at my favorite domain, sakerevolution.com.
Have to say, you're doing a nice job so far of painting a word picture for me.
All
So
right.
I'm seeing
You
this,
can picture this. Yes.
this small, vaguely boat-like structure.
Yep.
And the bags are laid in there on top of each other.
Yep. They're all
We've
filled
got
with
our
mash.
bags. We've got our boat. What's next?
Right. So what's going to happen is the weight of the bags all sitting on top of each other is going to naturally press down. And this rectangular box has a hole in the front, the short end, at the bottom. So there's like a drainage hole at the front bottom. So as the bags kind of weigh each other down, the liquid is going to come through the fabric of the bags, and the rice solids are held back inside the bags. And then the Fune is slightly tilted towards the front, and then the clear sake comes out the little hole at the front bottom. And that is how they initially start to do this pressing method. But after a while...
But I know how gravity works, and we're missing something very critical, because the bags on top, while they are providing weight for the bags on the bottom, but there's nothing going to squeeze out the sake that's there. So unless I am horribly mistaken, something else needs to happen. And what is that?
Yep. So gravity's going to do a little bit of a job for a while, and then it's going to stop coming out because the pressure is just not going to be enough. So what they do is they take a board and they lay it on top of the box, the same size roughly as the top opening of the box, and then they apply pressure from above. And this is going to squeeze all the bags simultaneously, and they're going to start to press down. And as these bags get squeezed, more liquid's going to come out of them. Again, all the rice solids are held back inside the bag, and then the liquid flows out the opening in the front bottom. And then they press down. And press
at that point,
down.
it literally gets squeezed out.
Literally, this is our literal squeezing. So this is shibori, or squeezing. And yeah, so this is a process using this Fune, or this rectangular box pressing. Have you ever heard of, I think there's a sushi method. Have you ever seen that box press sushi?
Of course. I happen to really like press sushi, actually.
Yeah. So this is, if you can picture that press sushi, this is a kind of a similar idea to that, where the board is on top and it starts to press down.
Now, you mentioned that this is the most traditional method. Does that mean, and based on the technology that we've been discussing so far, I'm beginning to lean that way. Was this the first method for pressing sake?
Well, this is the first method, I believe, that was used kind of commercially. Now, the very first funes were made of wood, and the original ones had a lever on the top. So instead of using like a hydraulic press to push that board down, they would have a lever that would jut out to one side, and they would actually attach rocks, large rocks, to ropes, and they would hang the rocks on the far edge of this lever, and that would pull it down. So this lever would come out to the side, and they would hang rocks, and this would pull the lever down, and it would press on the board. Before they had hydraulics, this was the original method for pressing down on the Fune. And there's a handful of breweries that still use this pressing method with the rocks hanging on the lever.
But I imagine there's probably a lot more that still use the hydraulic press to do it.
Yes. So in the early 20th century, the hydraulic press kind of came into use, and that was much more easy to navigate. And then a lot of Funes got upgraded to stainless steel. And the other episodes in this series are going to look at alternate methods for pressing, but this one is probably, as I said, the most traditional, and you see it in small breweries, and some breweries use it for their finest sake. So they're going to press certain grades of sake with maybe a small Fune, and the other grades of sake are going to use a more automatic pressing method, more mechanized. So some breweries reserve the Fune for their higher grades of sake. And some smaller breweries use Fune for everything. So it varies from brewery to brewery.
Oh, all right. Very interesting. I know you've spent some time at more than one sake brewery. Do you have any hands-on with the Fune?
Well, the brewery where I worked, the Fune was used for the most high-level sake. So I was not allowed to actually operate the Fune, but I was in attendance. And I was an eyewitness.
They let you watch the Fune, but they wouldn't let you use it? Were they afraid you were going to break it?
Well, it was high-stakes pressing was going on.
Oh,
so
high stakes. Was it a high-pressure situation? I'm doing it. It's contagious.
It was a high-pressure situation. Yes. But there's one other aspect to the Fune that I think is really important to talk about, and that's all pressings are not created equal. So we talked about the stuff that runs out just under the pressure on its own. Then they start pressing down a little bit, and then at the end, they really squeeze it down. So there's 3 phases of pressing, and they're considered different qualities of sake.
Oh.
Yeah. So the stuff that runs out by gravity alone, that's called arabashiri. I'm sure you've heard of that. A lot of sakes that are namas are called arabashiri, and that means rough run or the free run. So that's the stuff that just comes out by gravity alone before they apply any pressure. And because it's first, some people may think, oh, that's probably the best, but it's not considered the highest quality. It's a little bit brash and a little bit rough around the edges. It's actually called the rough run. And that's often used for nama or unpasteurized sake because it's zingy and bold and brash and green and not the most mellow of the pressing stages. So that's the arabashiri. Now, what's considered the most desirable is called nakadori. So naka means middle. So this is the middle pressing, and that's when they first begin to apply gentle pressure. And that is really the most desirable pressing. When they get towards the end and they're applying a lot more physical pressure to the bags, that's called the seme. And the seme pressing is the final bits, and that's also not considered the most desirable. So the nakadori or the middle pressing is really where it's at. And I've actually seen some sakes that brand themselves as the junmai nakadori or the middle pressing to indicate that it's like the highest quality part of the pressing.
Yeah, I'm actually familiar with a brand that uses nakadori in the title of one of their sakes. So that's really interesting for me to learn where that comes from.
Yep. So we've got arabashiri, nakadori, and then seme.
One thing I really like is that we don't just do theory, we do practical application.
Yes.
And sadly, or maybe not so sadly, it does not mean we're going to be pressing our own sake tonight. But I do understand we're going to be drinking sake tonight that was made using a Fune.
Yes. I found a brand for us to taste that uses an old school wooden Fune that they meticulously maintain they are very dedicated to handcrafting, and part of that, which they state on their website, is the maintenance of their very old wooden Fune press. And this is a brand that we actually have tasted before. This is Izumo Fuji.
Ah, yes, our old friends Izumo Fuji. I believe last time we tasted their Junmai Ginjo in episode 50. Oh, because it was 50% milled,
Yes.
and so we were very clever.
This was our 50th episode celebration sake, was the Izumo Fuji Junmai Ginjo. So if you'd like to go back and hear what we said about that sake, you can listen to episode 50. But we're revisiting Izumo Fuji, and today we are tasting the Junmai.
Excellent, excellent. Yeah, I'm really glad that we're getting to try another sake from this brewery. I happen to really like the Junmai Ginjo.
Well, do you want to give us the stats for the Izumo Fuji Junmai?
Sure. So, this is the Izumo Fuji Junmai, made in Shimane Prefecture. The Samai Buwai, or the remaining rice after milling, is 70%. The Nihonshudo is plus 4.5, so we're looking at something pretty dry. Probably not going to knock our socks off with dryness, but it's definitely going to be a little bit up there. Acidity, 1.8. That's a tiny bit of a notch higher than we're used to. 16% alcohol, so right in the middle there. And Yamada Shiki rice. And we happen to know that they use a fune to make this.
Yes.
And if you really want to get into the weeds, their shubo method, which we did I might say, lovely set of episodes on, is a sokujo.
That's right. So this is from Izumo City in Shimane, and the Izumo Shrine is one of the most revered and most ancient Shinto shrines in Japan. And they say that every October, all the deities from around Japan return to Izumo and answer prayers from that shrine every year. And the Fuji of Izumo Fuji is Mount Fuji, which is one of the ultimate symbols of Japan. So they named their brand Izumo for the city and that famous shrine near their brewery, and then Fuji for the ultimate symbol of Japan through Mount Fuji. And this brewery is run by the Imaoka family. The current president is only the third generation, and it was founded in 1939. So this is a baby in the world of sake breweries.
Oh, spring chicken, this Izumo Fuji.
Yes. Yeah, and they have, I think, 4 or 5 brewers, so it's a small staff, and they are sticking with their old wooden fune. So these sakes are pressed using this more traditional method, and that speaks to their overall philosophy of how they make their sake. They are not modernizers as far as the equipment goes.
As the opposite of some of our brand focuses recently.
Exactly. That's right.
Very interesting.
Yeah, well, let's get our Izumo Fuji Junmai opened up and in the glass.
Yes, let's do that. All right, so we've got this poured, Tim.
Yes.
Let's talk about that complexion and color.
Yeah, mine has just a hint of a yellow color to it. Very, very gentle yellow cast.
Yes, very gentle yellow cast. I am seeing it, it's very clear, though, apart from that. Nothing, no haze.
No. It's very clear. And let's give it a smell.
That is really interesting. I was expecting something a little bit more plain, a little bit more pure ricey.
Yep.
Given the 70%, but this is a lot more interesting than that, isn't it?
Yeah, it's primarily fruity in nature. A little bit of, I get, normally we say like melon or honeydew, but I get pear. If you think about like apple or pear, that crisp seeded fruit.
Like Asian pear specifically, or like a honey crisp apple almost.
All right. Well, it smells delicious. Looks
does.
delicious. I'm going to go ahead and give it a taste. Very interesting. More riciness coming across on the palate. You know, it's interesting. The back of the bottle says this is an umami type sake with a ricey sweetness on the palate and a crisp finish. And I was like, how umami driven can it be with this aroma, this like pear and apple aroma? But there's this base note of rice on the palate and just a hint of fruitiness around the edges of the flavor. But primarily, it's a very pleasant and very grounded rice flavor. And this is, I don't know if you agree with me, John, but this is not umami driven the way that a Kimoto or Yamahai or super funky ricey one's going to be. This is more a very gentle, soft, and pleasing rice aroma and a hint of fruitiness on the edges of that, and just really lovely. And there's a depth here too that I really like.
Yeah, I am also surprised. When I was smelling it earlier, I was expecting a lot of rice. I didn't get it, and then when I sip it, there's the rice.
Yeah,
and you know, as you mentioned, the fruit is still there. Like it's still present. It's still at the edges. It's still saying hello. But the rice kind of becomes the star, and there is a nice bit of depth to it, and it dances with that fruitiness. It's really nicely balanced, and there's a lot of interesting things going on. Nothing really distracts from the rest. It's really in harmony.
Yeah.
And it honestly does remind me an awful lot of the Junmai Ginjo, which I think is almost like a drier version of that. That's one thing I'm getting from this. The one thing I'm really noticing is that it is quite dry.
That's a great way to put it. I really like that, John. But the other thing I want to call your attention to is the acidity. And I find that acidity comes through at the end to kind of button everything up. Really unique, really interesting sake, and super delicious, really good.
I don't get as much of the crisp finish that they describe in the tasting note. I do think that, you know, the acidity does perhaps have it linger a little bit. Usually when we say crisp on the show, when we talk about it, we're talking about something that kind of is a definitive finish and kind of sometimes leaves you a little wanting for more, but also like ends the flavoring kind of almost definitively and sets you up for whatever you're going to do next, be it food or more sake. And here I am feeling like it's lingering after that acidity. Still very pleasant, still really nice, but just a little bit different than some of that language came across.
Yeah.
Although just what I'm getting out of it. Who knows? I'm just one guy.
Well, it's a really interesting interpretation of what Yamada Nishiki can do. It's giving us a fruitiness in the aroma, a nice riciness on the palate, bright acidity on the finish, just all around super interesting, engaging, and not boring, not light. Just something. It's like a sake you can really sink your teeth into. That's super easy drinking. I love it.
Yeah. Now, let's talk about food for a minute. What are your thoughts?
Well, it's super approachable Junmai sake. And like I said, very interesting, good depth of flavor. And I think you could pair very widely and broadly with this. And this is one of those sakes that you can kind of bring in, and it's a clutch hitter.
All right. Okay. I think I see what you're saying here.
I'm thinking about my favorite foods, which is like yakitori, which I love. And I think that would be fantastic with this. I think that would be really good.
So you're saying this is a bit of a jack of all trades then, as far as food pairing?
Absolutely. I think this is a real pinch hitter, and you can bring it in. And this is a sake I would bring to a party if I didn't know what they were serving. I think this is a crowd pleaser.
I love the way you put that. That is fantastic. Yeah. I don't know if it's just me, but I desperately want to have this with some sort of like a katsu. I just feel like it's going to play really well with the crispiness and the oil a little bit. I just think it's just making me think like pork katsu or something like that.
Yeah, and that katsu sauce, that brown sauce that they put on katsu, it's the most delicious part, and it's umami, distilled umami, and that would bring out the bottom note of this sake, that hint of umami that you get on the mid palate. That would really come out with that katsu sauce that I love. Oh my God, it's so good. Katsu is one of my favorite Japanese foods. Love it. That's a good call too, the katsu. Love it.
I've been a fan, but I really developed much more of an appreciation for it over the past year or so. And so I don't know why, but right now I'm just like, oh, this sake just makes me think of that particular dish. And it's giving me strong desires for it.
How do you feel about the katsu sando?
I am somewhat inexperienced with the katsu sando at this point. I've only
have to
had
rectify
like 2. But I have enjoyed both of them.
So the katsu sando, for our listeners who may not know, it's a deep fried breaded pork cutlet sandwich. So you get some nice soft white bread. You get the panko crusted pork cutlet, maybe some shredded cabbage on there, and then that delicious sauce. It's so good.
I have to say, it took me a little bit of encouraging to go there, because in my head, I felt like, it's like the breaded pork cutlet, and I'm like, it's already breaded. It already has the bread. It does not need additional bread.
It needs additional
I do
bread.
realize that chicken parm is a thing, guys. Not to write in. So, for me, I was just like, well, no, I don't know about putting bread on bread. On breading, and then I did it, and I was wrong, and I needed to shut up. That's basically what it boils down to.
Good.
Sometimes you might think that something doesn't work in your head, and you try it, and you realize that maybe I was wrong.
Yeah,
this is really nice. So Tim, you mentioned earlier that you were not allowed to operate the Fune, but they did let you watch. That's the next best thing to actually working it. What were your takeaways from that? Did you have any fun stories from that?
Well, it's easy to say they take these sacks or these like pillowcase shaped bags and they fill them with mash and they lay them in the box. But how do they actually make that happen? And watching it in person, it was a high wire act that made me very nervous, and I understood why they didn't want me, the below the intern person, why they didn't want me doing it. Basically, there is a pump that you have a flexible hose, and the hose comes right over the Fune, and then there's a special nozzle that has 2 handles on either side, and you twist it one way and it opens, and you twist it the other way and it closes. So they hold the pillowcase bag underneath that, they twist it to the right, and the mash flows into the bag, and this is all balancing above the Fune box. And then when it's filled to about 70%, they twist it to the left and it stops the flow of the mash into the bag. Then they have to hold the bag and gently lay it down in order, stacking them like bricks, one next to the other, one on top of the other. And they have to turn the faucet on and off, fill the bags while dangling over the box. And then when they're filling the bottom row, they actually bend at the waist and are halfway down into this 4-foot deep box, laying these bags one on top of the other. And then they have a flip fold at the end of the pillowcase shaped bag so that the mash doesn't run out. So they fold it under and then over so that it kind of seals the edge of the bag. And then they have to smooth it out and make sure that they are as evenly stacked as possible. And then when you're all done and everything is all pressed out, guess what you have to do? This is what they did let me do, was clean the bags. So
lucky you.
When everything is pressed out, you have the unfermented rice kasu, or the solids, left over in the bags. You have to turn them inside out, get the kasu out, save that, and then you have to wash the bags multiple times to get every last micron of sake kasu or the rice out of there.
And that's an intern job.
That was my job.
I have to say, I don't feel so bad about not having done the high wire act myself. Number one, that sounds incredibly precise, and number two, my lower back is hurting thinking about this. Like, I'm just it just
Yes.
does not sound like a good time. It sounds like a pretty good way to build some upper body strength, though.
Yes.
But wow.
And let me just tell you one last thing about the cleaning job, because this was the cherry on the sundae for this work. The way you clean the bags, is called the Fukuro Punch, or the sake mash sack punch. And what you do is, after all the kasu's out and you fill it with water, you twist the end that's open, you twist it closed, and then you press it with two fists like an accordion and squeeze the water through the bag. And that pushes water through all the fibers to get every last bit out. And I had to do this for every bag we used. I had to do the Fukuro Punch. I had to do it 3 times for every bag.
Is this just like water, or is like a cleaning solution in there?
No, it's water. Just pure
water.
brewing water. That is it. And it is cold, and it can get in your boots if you're not careful. So...
So clearly we need to make a cocktail
called the Fukuro Punch.
Absolutely. Why has this not happened yet? Fukuro Punch needs to be a cocktail. Well, next week's episode we'll figure out what the Fukuro Punch is, and then we'll try to make a few and
calling all bartenders.
Calling all bartenders. Yes, somebody please tell us what the Fukuro Punch is. If somebody comes at us and has an idea of what the Fukuro Punch cocktail should be, I will make it on the show.
Okay.
I'm putting a challenge out there. I want to do this.
All right. Well, Fukuro Punch it is.
Fun.
All right. Wow, that was fun. Who knew that the Fune could be such a wild ride?
I thought you were going to take the low-hanging fruit and say,
what was that?
Fune could be so much fun.
Fune? No.
I didn't say that. That's getting deleted. Anyway.
Okay. Yes. Well, I think we had a lot of fun with the Fune.
Exactly. Well, that was a lot of fun.
All right. Well, John, great tasting with you as always. And I want to also thank our listeners for tuning in. We really do hope that you're enjoying our show. Now, if you'd like to support Sake Revolution, the very best way you can help us out would be to back us on Patreon. Patreon is our community of listeners, and we are a 100% community-funded podcast. We thank you so much for your support, and we hope to meet you soon on one of our live Zooms.
That's right. And another way to help us out in a big way is to give us a review on your podcast platform of choice. That still has a huge impact. Gets the show out there. People see it on their suggestion feeds, and it gets new eyes on our show, and it really does help. Also, it makes us feel good to read the reviews, I think. Right, Tim?
Right on.
Excellent. So after you're done writing your review, please then go out and tell your friends, tell your family, tell the family dog, and get them all to subscribe. Subscribing means that every week when we put out a new episode, that shows up on your device of choice, and you don't miss any of them. Not one. It's great. It's a really good system. I'm a big fan of it.
And as always, to learn more about any of the pressing topics or sakes that we talked about in today's episode, be sure to visit our website, sakerevolution.com, for all the detailed show notes.
And we know you have sake questions that you need answered, and we want to hear them. Please reach out to us at feedback@sakerevolution.com. We need those recipes. Until next time, please remember to keep drinking sake and
Kampai!